Well, hello and welcome to the 2020 Deep Valley Book Festival and the History Writers Panel. My name is Danelle Erickson and I'm with the Blue Earth County Historical Society and also a member of the Book Festival Planning Committee. So I'm excited to be joined today by 5 history writers. So we'll introduce them quickly. And so we've got Susan Vistendam and Terry Carlson, Joyriggs, Bryce Stenzel, and Dale Swanson. So thanks for everybody for being here. So let's just dive right in and talk about some history and books. So to start out with, why don't each of you just tell us a little bit about your historic writing that you've done and maybe share one of your books. So we will start with Susan, if you're gonna get us started.
Okay, I'd be happy to. I'm Susan Vistendam from Northfield, and I've written 5 books of local history. I have 3 volumes in my Historic Happenings series about Northfield, St. Olaf, and Carleton colleges, which were taken from a monthly column that I wrote for the Entertainment Guide. And I have a new 600-page book, History of the St. Olaf Band here, which was just published last December by All Means Graphics in Northfield, along with my co-author, Jeff Sauvé.
Great, thank you. Terry, how about you?
Hi, I'm Terry Carlson. I write historical fiction primarily, and I live in Winona, Minnesota, so ways down the river from Northfield. I have interest in a lot of different periods, but I've been focusing on colonial America, especially during the French and Indian War. And my novel that I have completed here is called A Mistake of Consequence. And it covers a period of time just at the beginning of the French and Indian War when there were indentured servants, and a young woman from Scotland was kidnapped off the docks there and sold as an indentured servant in the American colonies. And it's kind of her journey.
Oh, great. Joy.
Hi everyone, I'm Joyriggs. My book is Crackerjack Bands and Hometown Boosters, the story of a Minnesota music man. This is my great-grandfather here behind me, Joyriggs. I live in Northfield across the river from Susan, but I'm originally from Alexandria, Minnesota, and my background is in journalism. And my book covers kind of the story of my great-grandfather from the turn of the century through World War II. He was a band leader in Minnesota and other parts. And I've become an expert in band history, not something that I originally, I used to play in bands, so I was interested, but I've become now an expert on band history. So any question you have for me, I can try to answer.
Bryce, how about you?
I'm Bryce Stenzel, and I live in St. Clair, but I'm a native of Mankato. And my books cover the history of southern Minnesota, Blue Earth County, and the Minnesota River Valley. I wrote one on German immigration, one on Mankato for its 150th sesquicentennial several years ago. But my specialty is Abraham Lincoln. I've written several playbooks on Lincoln. I'm also a costume historical interpreter. And my most recent book is one that I co-authored with Julie Schrader, the organizer of this Deep Valley Book Festival, and we're currently involved in a project known as the Boy in Blue, the restoration, or actually the recreation of a Civil War Veterans Memorial in Mankato, and it's an ongoing project because it started in 2010, but we're still raising money now for the maintenance, even though the statue and the fountain has been replaced.
All right. And Dale, finish us up with our introductions.
I can do that. My name is Dale Swanson, and I guess I have history in all of my books. I'm a historical fiction writer. I've also got a memoir out here, but my very first book is called The 39th Man. And it is a book about the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. And it really covers, I have a fictional character that I weave in and out of the history of the Northwest Territory, which Minnesota was a part of. And a lot of people didn't even know about this thing, but I know from Mankato, there's at least one person here that knows about it. So it's in 1862, a man cut a single rope. 38 Native Americans died at the same time. And my book covers everything leading up to that. I really delved into the history, so it really and truly took about 6 years because I got deep into the history. And I use history as a portion. That's what drives it, is really I weave my character in and out of historical facts. And it ends at the hangings in Mankato.
All right, well, thanks again for being here, and we'll just kind of keep going with some questions here. So obviously research is a big part of any historical writing. So does anybody care to share kind of some of the resources that you've used, if there's any unique ones or ones that you keep finding yourself going back to again and again?
The internet's pretty valuable.
Yeah.
I like to read first-person accounts from the time period that I'm creating a story from. So one of the things I read for that my book was a letter from a young woman who was writing home to her father in England. He had sold her as an indentured servant, and she was writing home saying, "Hey, please send me some clothes. There's not enough clothing here." And those kinds of personal letters that are really valuable in figuring out the mood or the tone of the period.
I spent a lot of time with historic newspapers, and I love old newspapers, and it's easy to get sucked in and then forget, like, what was I even doing here? But it gives you such a sense for the time, and whether it's like advertisements for clothing and how much a loaf of bread cost, or were people buying bread, or were they making bread, just so I love that. And I know that as a former journalist, there are things to watch out for when you're reading accounts in the newspapers, especially from 100 years ago. Things were different, but it really is useful to kind of create a sense for what was going on in the time. And so it's not an unusual source, but it really is, there's great ways to do it. You can do it online, or also going up to the History Center up in St. Paul. I spent a lot of time up there. And then also, Ancestry.com, other records with censuses and city directories, any kinds of pieces you can pull here and there to create kind of a bigger picture of the time frame you're writing about, I found helpful.
I agree with Joy entirely there, because old newspapers are fascinating to me as well. And when I've been doing my history explorations, I go to the library over at in Northfield, and they have old-fashioned microfilm like I used to use back in my college days. And so I have these young kids that come around, "What is that?" They're so fascinated by plain old microfilm. But yes, I think going to libraries is also something that you should consider in terms of checking out your local history and for research. I certainly Joy and I are great proponents of libraries.
I don't know about anybody else, but I find myself oftentimes going so deeply into it that all of a sudden I look back and I say, "Holy cow, what am I doing over here? I'm supposed to be doing this other thing." But it's so darn interesting, and it's easy to go astray.
And of course, we have to mention Google. I mean, thank heavens for Google, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Even Google Books. Google is a search engine, but Google Books, which puts a lot of primary sources available to us that wouldn't be otherwise.
Okay.
I have a question for everyone else that's here. Have you ever realized that something that you were reading is totally different than something you have just read, and it's a historical event? I'll bet you that's pretty common, isn't it? Does everybody has that happen to you?
Something that you accepted as fact for a while, and then something else comes along that causes you to question it. And
that's exactly what happens. You know, I've seen it. It's many times where they are opposites almost, and you have to really make sure that you're looking at the right thing. And the only way I have of doing that is to research deeper and deeper and see basically what the majority says. And of course, you know, the Joe Dokes down the hall, his doesn't really count when it comes to that. You have to go to verified places.
Well, I was just going to say September 7th, 1876 is when the Great Robbery was here in Northfield, you know, the Jesse James younger gang. And I have done some research into that, and boy, you've got so many conflicting accounts, you know, and we were hoping to celebrate it, you know, like we have in the past. That's just going to be a one-day celebration now, and mostly virtual on Saturday.
And I was going to add to that there's so many different perspectives of things, so that the different people witnessing the same event each write their own truthful account of the event, but what they noticed or what they saw or what they understood from it is not the same.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's very true. Eyewitness accounts can be misleading if you don't get enough of them to flesh out, you know, and get a big picture, because they will conflict with each other. And even though 10 people saw the same thing, everybody saw it a little bit different. The Lincoln assassination is an excellent example of that. You know, you had all these people in the theater that night, but when they were interviewed, many of the eyewitnesses were interviewed afterwards, everybody told a different story. Some claimed that, you know, Booth shouted out "Sic Semper Tyrannis." Others said he never said anything. Some said he broke his leg in the fall. Some said he didn't. You know, there's all sorts of different eyewitness testimony. So you got to pull all that together to create a narrative.
Mm-hmm. Very true. So yeah, does anybody have any, as you're doing your research, something that you've come across that really surprises you didn't expect? Or I mean, we kind of talked a little bit of finding some of those conflicting reports, but anything that just really surprised you? Anybody?
On my second novel, I found that President Grant he had a cabal, and it was a group of his main cohorts in the White House, and they planned to do the war with the Sioux Nation to get the Black Hills back, because they thought it contained a lot of gold. And he had sent everybody's favorite, Major Custer, Captain Custer, General Custer, whatever he was called at a particular point in time. But they sent him in with, strangely enough, gosh, he had some prospectors with him. So he reported that gold was there. And so Grant did that. And I found some very interesting things about the plot to kill all the buffalo, because you get rid of the buffalo, you get rid of the Indian. And that's about how it worked out. That's what they tried to do.
One thing that surprised
After Joy, I have a story.
Oh, one thing that surprised me, and it surprised me more now that post my book coming out, came out a year ago, but one of the chapters I talk about post World War I, when my great-grandfather was in Bemidji, and he was taking over the band there and starting a boys band, and then his efforts were hampered because of the flu pandemic, and then that was followed by measles, and then, you know, the boys couldn't practice for a long time, and that time the flu, you know, was more concerning for younger people than older people, but affected, you know, lots of people. And so just thinking about how, you know, sometimes we think their lives were so different from ours. 100 years ago, things were so different, fashions were different, but really, the way people respond to things, it's so similar. We're really not, so that I shouldn't be surprised, but I think I am constantly surprised at how history, it really, people are so much the same, and how we can learn from each other and from generations, and how quickly we can forget things that we should know because, maybe our grandparents went through it, but, it's just different when it's, you're present.
Well, I was going to say, yes, I was going to say that I've encountered a lot of human interest stories when I was writing Milestones and Memories of the St. Olaf Band, and a lot of them came through interviews. And then there was a story that came up that the current band conductor, Tim Marr, when I told him about it, he had no idea that this had happened. And I wanted to just mention this one. I think it has a universal appeal. There was a car crash in March of 2001 that killed 3 St. Olaf students, and one of them was a band clarinetist. And conductor Tim Marr wrote a composition to honor him, because Tim Marr is quite well known as a composer as well. And so they took it on tour in the fall of 2001. And when I talked to clarinetist Abigail Ryan, she said, every night I would hear quiet sobbing coming from a different corner of the clarinet section during the piece's closing section. Unspoken, we took turns carrying the weight of playing so that everyone could have a chance to breathe. A story like that just, hurts your heart, when you hear that. And so that's the sort of thing that can surprise you, something that you hadn't realized. And just because I happened to ask that question of it, that's how it came to pass that I got into the book.
All right. Well, I know we've got a couple of you have written more of the historic fiction books. If you wanted to kind of Terry and Dale and others, if you wanted to join in as well. But how do you kind of balance that, the fiction part versus the historic? Any thoughts that you want to share on that side of things?
Once a person, I think, has done some research on the historical perspective that was at that time, I find it pretty easy to weave a fictional character in and out of that, out of the fabric that is being made during that period of time. And I don't think it's difficult at all, at least from where I sit, to be able to put my character into a real situation that really happened. And he was there. He wasn't a major part of it, maybe, but he was there for the happening. And the reason I really try to follow the historical aspects of this is people can learn a lot if they're reading it in a novel, and they can follow the process, and they hopefully, it's my desire to make people say, wow, I didn't know that. And I would think that all of us will probably have that same reaction.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I also find it fairly easy to weave the character into the story. I think what I write is probably social history, so it's not so much a single famous event, but the way things were. So in 1754, we were just starting the French and Indian War. How did an ordinary person, and I usually have a female character as my primary character, how did this ordinary person deal with life as it was then? So what did a woman do to take care of herself, to take care of her family? And within this backdrop of nobody was very free at that time. So we think about slavery versus freedom, but there were lots of variations in between, and the whole idea of indenture is really mixed in there, and how people got indentured. So we have this social backdrop, and then I make up the person, but not the time period, if that makes sense.
That sure makes sense to me.
Bryce, I know a lot of your books, like your Lincoln plays, you've obviously written in a play format. Do you want to share a little bit of kind of how why do you chose that format? Kind of maybe the pros or cons, or how that came to be
Sure,
in your writing.
sure. I'm a teacher by vocation, and I love history, but I want to get other people, particularly students, involved. And I thought, what better way to do that was to create this role play where students could actually act out the parts rather than just passively reading it as a narrative. And that's proven to be very effective. Students that otherwise would say, "Oh, history doesn't interest me," or "It's boring." We've probably all heard people say that about our vocation, which it's not. History is very interesting when it's treated as a story, because that's really what it is. Uh, but these young people actually get very involved in it, and it becomes a part of them. So that's why I chose that genre or that way of writing. It's a little different than writing, straight narrative history, although I can do that as well. I've done it with the German immigration book that I wrote. That's the more traditional, narrative approach. But these playbooks are written so that people can actually involve themselves in the action if they wish. But on the other hand, if somebody wants to read it as a straight narrative, they can do that as well. So it's multi-purpose type book.
Great. And then Joy and Susan, your subject may be a little bit closer to home. Joy, especially, it was your ancestor that you wrote about. How do you kind of bring in if it's the research or the storytelling, how do you kind of combine those? Joy, if you want to go first, and then Susan, if you have anything else to add, just kind of more connecting that history and your maybe a little bit more of a personal connection.
Yeah, I started out I was going to help my dad with a brief research project. He was playing in the St. Cloud Municipal Band, and my great-grandfather, my dad's paternal grandfather, directed that band for 20 years. And so they were having a band anniversary, and I was going to help him with that. Well, I just got so fascinated with the history and realizing I didn't really know much, if anything, about my great-grandfather or my great-grandmother, who was a accomplished pianist. And so I started interested in finding out the story of St. Cloud, but then it blossomed into what were they doing before that, and then it became what was going on in this country with bands being like post-civil or Civil War. Every town had a band. At some point, then it switched from community bands to school bands, and the importance of music in getting people through tough times. And so I just, as I said, I learned a lot about band history. And as I was telling people about my discoveries, they were especially interested in how it connected to my personal life. And so as a journalist, I always find other people way more fascinating than I am, but I love telling people stories. And so I ended up tracking down some men who had played for my great-grandfather who actually knew him. And so then it became a trying to figure out, how do I tell their stories? How do I tell my great-grandfather's story? How do I make it into something that, that people will relate to today? People who love music, or live in small towns, or they just see the importance of community. So my book ends up being kind of the chapters alternate between being creative nonfiction, telling the story of my great-grandfather and his life through, as I said, these decades, and then me finding out about things about him. So it's not a straight biography, it's not a memoir, it's kind of a combination of those things, but hopefully throughout people get a sense for what it was like for him to live in that time, and why it's so important still today that people, why they like Susan's book, like why the St. Olaf Band has been going on for years and years and years, what people get out of being part of that community.
Well, the name of my book is Milestones and Memories of the St. Olaf Band, 1891 to 2018. And since that's the most recent one, I'll tell you how my connection is with that. It came about because the St. Olaf Band was celebrating its 125th year with a concert in Carnegie Hall in 2016. And the conductor, Timothy Marr, knew that I had been in the band, and that's part of it. I played alto clarinet in the band and had written 4 books about local history. So he persuaded the archivist Jeff Sauvé and me to tackle the history of the band because celebrate that 125th anniversary. And so Jeff covered the early years, and I covered from 1957 up to 2018. 1957 is when my band conductor, Mikey Johnson, had come. And then covered 2018 through the tours of New Zealand and Australia. And since there have been so many wonderful tours that were, part of the past of the band, I could relate to that because in 1966, my band had been the 60th anniversary tour of the 1906 band, which F. Milius Christiansen had taken to Norway. And so in all my interviews, I was able to tell people, I was one of you, I was a bandy, and so that always opened the doors, to conversation and to getting stories from them. I've considered it a real privilege to have been chosen to record and preserve the history of the St. Olaf Band. Many people have heard about the choir, obviously, but the St. Olaf Band was F. Milius Christiansen's first love. He didn't put the choir together until many years after he had established the band. And the band has been called one of America's preeminent bands by the New Yorker, and it has a fascinating history. So I'm very pleased, as I said, to have been chosen to record that.
All right. So, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, recently, my latest book is entitled Simpler Times. And I wrote this book because, talking about history, I wanted my grandchildren to know what it was like growing up when I grew up. Now, I'm 78 years old, which is probably older than anybody else here. And I lived through the history. But what enabled it to happen was Ancestry, Ancestry.com. I got out of the clear blue sky, I got a letter from Sweden. I thought that I was the last male in the family. Well, it turns out my great-grandfather was one of 10. And of course, it led me into other things. But I wrote the book, and I think it's important from all of us in a historical perspective to pass on to the family what it was like when I wrote about my grandfather, my grandmother on both sides, when they came to this country, what they endured. And then I went in and lightened it up a little bit with my childhood. And I guess I was kind of a naughty kid, but not really bad. So I never got thrown in jail. So I did things that just aren't done now, though, and where I grew up, it was much, much different. Of course, it was a simpler time.
Great. All right, so you've done your research, you've done your writing. Now it's time to publish. Anybody have any publishing stories or the road to publication? Anything there to share?
Well, I would share the fact that I didn't want to put out a defective product, is probably a polite way to say it. So I tried to sell my first book to anyone and everyone. I must have written 50 or 60 letters, and all of them said, gee, not me, I'm not interested in that. I paid one person to edit it. The first group that I sent it to, well, I'll tell you, it was North Star Press here in Minnesota. I sent it to them and they said, yeah, we want it, we'll publish it. And so that's how my first book got published. And since that time, of course, there was very little jingle that came with it because they collect the lion's share. And I'm sure everyone's aware of that. But I was able to buy that back. So now I have the rights to all the books I've written. And it's not an easy process. It's a difficult process, but once you do it and you've gone through it and you know the steps that have to be taken, it's not so bad. It's not bad at all.
I knew that I wanted a small press or university press, that kind of regional, and that was my goal, to try to target those publications or presses. So I sent out several, queries. It took me about a year, and Noden Press in Minneapolis is the one that ended up publishing it. And so I didn't get an agent because I didn't think it was, that kind of book. I'd done a lot of research and knew presses that it might be a good fit for. So I was really excited to get it published by a press that could get it into libraries and get it into local bookstores. And I also planned on, doing a lot of events, which of course has been curtailed a little bit with COVID, but getting out to towns, because my great-grandfather was band director up in Crookston and in Bemidji, and took his St. Cloud boys to the Twin Cities, and so there's a lot of locations geographically that make sense to visit, but I also just knew the power of having it, but I wanted to have it published one way or the other, so I was looking into other options as well if I hadn't found Noden.
My books are self-published or independently published. The Mistake of Consequence went through Abbott Press, which is the self-publishing arm of Writer's Digest. And that one of the things that I enjoy about independently publishing is that I get to decide what the covers look like and the formatting. I enjoy the formatting of the book. I did have outside editors and outside readers check it, because you can't do the final editing on your own book because you can't see everything. You already know what happened and you miss stuff. So I did have outside editors take care of looking for those kinds of things. And I've been pretty happy with that part of the publishing. Of course, you don't get a lot of sales that way, but and I'm not really good at the marketing aspect of it, but I think the stories are worth telling and worth reading. And so I'm doing the writing because I think the stories are important more than the sales.
I would agree with that. I think the stories are important and they need to be told. History's timeless, but especially now we need to reconnect with our past in many ways.
I'd like to get a plug actually in for my publisher, By All Means Graphics, because local publishers are something that people should look into. Northfield Historical Society and By All Means Graphics published my first book, which was about the Lyceum building in Northfield. And then they teamed up for the entertainment guide, with the entertainment guide, to publish my 3 historic happenings books as well. And they just did a wonderful job. And so I do think people should look for local publishers, because they can do the layout, they can do so much for you, and it's certainly been helpful with my career.
So I think what I'm hearing is there's lots of options. If you want to do a lot yourself, or if you want, from independently to the small publishers to a little bit bigger. So there's all sorts of options out there.
What hit the nail on the head for me was when she said, marketing it is kind of tough. That's an understatement. That's a huge understatement.
Especially right now during COVID, right? Because we can't go out to the bookstores that we've been used to. And I was very fortunate with the band book, because we got it out in December and we could have a book signing during Winter Walk. And then after that, the Historical Society, we had a very well attended event for that. And the Star Tribune even covered it. But after that, like, within a few weeks, everything closed down. I have a niece who is actually has a national book, and her book tour closed down just like that. She was down here at Content Book, and after that was it. She had to postpone her across the nation tour. So
a lot of things have changed. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to go back to real quick. Bryce mentioned it a bit earlier too, where so many people seem, they think history is boring. All it is names and dates. What do you say in response to somebody that thinks history is boring?
I like to challenge them and say, let me prove to you that it's not.
Dale, did you have something to say?
That's a good way to go. But I think to people that think that, I don't understand, because history is the most interesting thing that has ever been, that you ever come across. If you really and truly are interested in anything, there is something that will explain it to you, or that will clarify any questions, whether it's an event that happened, or whether it's what they had for dinner on a typical night in 1815. And it's just, there are so many ways that you can use history in your life.
Well, history is the universal subject. Everything has a history.
Yep, absolutely.
I think it's kind of neat to interest people in different ways. It's not, history is not just names and dates, it's people and what people did. So one of the things that I do is I dabble in historical cookery. So I take really old recipes and then I interpret them and cook them and say, hey, you're eating history.
That's a great way to go.
That's food for thought. That's great.
Yeah. Well, William Shakespeare in The Tempest said, what's past is prologue. And so we really can learn from the past and from the people that we're writing about that lived in the past. John North founded Northfield, for example, and he had all these people that were committed to abolition and education and actually women's rights, things of that nature. So I think, I guess that's all I'll say in that.
Oh, that's absolutely true. It's just, I guess when I write history, I use it in my books. I want to, and it really seems to work, where people get drawn in following the story, and without even knowing it, they learn. And they learn because it's based on historical fact. And it can be made as interesting or as mundane as a person that's writing it. So I think as an author, we have a responsibility to try to do that, to inform. And if you can provide information to them while they're reading a good book, you can't beat it.
Joy, did you have something to add?
I was just going to say, Terry's, what you said about cooking and recipes made me think of, during the time I was writing my book, I was listening to music from the era. So whatever year I was writing, I actually looked up the popular music for that year. And so it was great, because like during the World War II era, I was listening to all this swing band stuff, and then I found some just amazing songs from the turn of the century that my great-grandfather's band, I have lists of the concert program, so like songs that they played. Sousa knew, they didn't only play marches, his band played all kinds of things, more, operettas, and so that was another kind of fun way to put myself in the history of the era and thinking about, people's senses, like, so taste and sounds, that all brings connections to you and makes it more interesting.
Well,
Much more than dates and names. Yes, definitely.
There's the old cliche, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. And I think we've seen that on a number of occasions where history does repeat itself. So it's worth learning.
I seem to make the same mistakes sometimes. But adding those details of like music and food and clothing and makes the story come alive, I think.
I think that's important as a writer for us to do that. In mine, I've referenced snowstorms that happened at a certain point in time back in the 1800s, and they're documented, but people don't know that. People don't know in general, I mean, some of the things that we learn as we're looking into the historical aspects of writing a book. You know, depending upon what the subject is, there is a never-ending amount of information that makes it interesting to anyone that reads it.
I don't understand how people say that history is boring. For example, I've been able to preserve in print stories of real people who passed through. For example, General Eisenhower came to Northfield and 10,000 people went to hear him. And there was a time in 1915 when 5 lions attacked their trainer at a carnival in Northfield. I mean, that's not boring. So it just sort of, it just really surprises me that people think that the stories from the past can't be riveting. And certainly, there's so many stories connected with Lincoln, for example, that I'm sure that Bryce has worked with.
Oh yeah, Lincoln is in my book too.
And well, yes, all of us have had that experience.
Exactly. Thousands of books have been written on Lincoln, and we don't ever exhaust the subject.
Exactly.
Because there's so many.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one more thing. History is like a roadmap. You don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. It provides a point of reference.
For sure.
Mhm.
Yes.
Great. All right, well, we are just about out of time. So just kind of last, if any of you have kind of an upcoming project or a current project that you're working on, or anybody want to share any little teasers of what you've got next?
I'm working on a historical mystery set in colonial Pennsylvania about a woman who ends up at a tavern and finds a dead man in the privy, calling it a necessary death.
Nice.
I'm actually working on an essay about my grandmother, my mom's side of the family, so I felt like I had to give her some equal time. And you mentioned mystery. My grandmother was an Agatha Christie fan. She turned me on to Agatha Christie. So the essay, I actually solve a mystery about my grandmother's life, her past. But I don't know where I'm going with it. I'm still working on it. It's not a book, but it'll probably be some kind of essay.
Anybody else?
Who was that?
Go ahead, Dale. Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to say I'm working a follow-up book that I'm doing right now. Actually, I got 3 of them in the works, and I kind of varied going from one, and then I'll do something until I run out of ideas for that or for whatever reason. Then I'll go to another one. But I wrote one children's book, and it was really, really widely accepted. And I ended the book with an unusual phrase, and it leads me into the second book. And the second book, I really believe that a person, if they're gonna write, I always write something that I've experienced or something that I know of a place where I've been, or things of that nature. You know, so there's a little bit of a personal viewpoint on just about everything I write. And this next one is about, a portion of it's going to take place in New Hampshire, a portion of it's going to take place in Tananarive, Madagascar, of all places. But it's a follow-up, and I think people are going to learn some things there as well. Although it's a children's book, it's got a lot of truths in it.
Yeah, I just finished working on a project researching the Lincoln Memorial because its centennial's coming up here in 2022. And I've also, this summer, wrote another play on the history of Mount Rushmore. So I'm working on combining those ideas into one work, one volume.
All right, well.
I just want to thank you, Danelle. I think this has been a wonderful opportunity. I think all of us miss this contact person, personally, that we can have with our readers. And this has just been a great opportunity that the Deep Valley Book Festival provides for us to contact with the readers. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. It's been great chatting with you. And do want to remind our viewers that there's a lot of great additional book festival content that you can watch. So be sure to subscribe and watch all of that. So also want to visit the deepvalleybookfestival.com for the festival schedule. There's also, you make sure you check out the author directory. So we've got a full listing of all the authors involved, along with biographies and information on where everybody can buy your books and all of that great stuff as well. So thanks everybody again for being here, and happy reading, everybody.